you too. Thank you. Basically, thank you for being here. Okay, let's start. My name is Milad Rasaymanesh, and I'm going to be the host of the program for today's seminar. Welcome to our online seminar. It's called Human Rights Abuse in Iran and Swedish Government's Diplomacy. We started with a bit of delay because of these randomers attacking us, basically. But hopefully we're gonna finish the seminar in the proper time, since we missing one of the panelists. Anika said she cannot actually attend this seminar. It was like a very short notice. So basically, I'm not really sure what happened to Anika, but basically they decided not to attend the seminar. We respect their decisions, but it would be great if they could, and Anika could actually attend the seminar. Today we're gonna have 5 panelists. I'm just gonna give a brief introduction of each panelist, and then I'm gonna start actually the first part of the seminar. The first part, actually, I'm gonna ask a general question of each panelist. So basically, each speakers would have 5 minutes to express what he or she thinks about the questions. On the second part, the microphones would be open. So basically, the panelists can discuss each other, ask questions, and challenge each other, basically. On the third part, actually, I'm going to ask the question that the audiences has sent us. So basically, the people watch the program right now, please bear in mind you can actually raise questions, put comments, and express yourself somehow based on your comments and the things that you would say. I'm gonna actually go to a specific panelist and ask your questions. So feel free to participate at the online seminar we're running at the moment. And then on the final part, we're gonna have a very brief conclusion. Hopefully the seminar gonna be ended in 1 hour. So basically a 7:30 max gonna be the time that we're gonna end the seminar. I'm just gonna give a short introduction of each panelist. Maya Oberry. Maya is a senior policy advisor at Amnesty International. Thank you, Maya, for being here. Camilla Hansen. Camilla is a member of the Swedish Parliament. Håkan Svenling, I hope I'm pronouncing correct. Håkan is also a member of a Swedish Parliament. And we have 2 more panelists, Shiva Mahboubi. Shiva is a spokesperson for the campaign to free political prisoners in Iran, CFPPI. And Bahram Surush is also here with us, coordinator of the campaign to boycott the Islamic regime of Iran. Thank you all for being here. It's my pleasure to be your host and running the seminar while you people are the panelists. All right, then let's start. The first person who gonna talk is, just give me a second, please. I have to check my list. The first speaker is gonna be Maya. Please remember, put your microphone on mute while you're not talking. And again, I would like to remind this program is recording live. So basically, if the audiences have any question, please ask your question. On this specific section, I'm gonna ask the question from the panelists and the speakers attending the meeting. All right, Maya, the first question, actually, the question for you and the other panelists, the first one would be, you coming from the Amnesty International, I mean, as far as I know, you guys record and watch the human rights situation in each country. How you evaluate the human rights situation in Iran? What do you think about the behaviors of the government toward its own citizens? How good or how bad you evaluate the human rights situation in Iran? Maya, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for arranging this conference, this meeting. I'm still slightly shaken by the beginning of this meeting.
That was not a great start. Sorry about that. I was also stressful. I know the feeling. Yeah.
I know it's an interesting experience, though. I mean, obviously, I know that these things happen, but I wasn't expecting it right now. But it goes to show how obviously some people go to great lengths to crash meetings like this. Anyway, thank you for the question, Milad. I know we're talking both about human rights in Iran, or rather, should I say, the lack of human rights in Iran, but also Swedish diplomacy. So it's too bad that Annika Bendavid could not be here, because obviously some of the things that we could talk about when it comes to diplomacy would be directed at the Swedish Foreign Ministry. I had planned to kind of start with a very short summary of Amnesty's view of the human rights situation in Iran. It only takes like 2 minutes, and it's basically the summary of Amnesty's annual report when it comes to human rights in Iran. So bear with me. I think I'm just going to do that because it paints the picture of the very sad state of human rights in Iran. So it reads like this. The authorities heavily suppressed the rights to freedom of expression, association, and assembly. Security forces used unlawful force to crush protests. The authorities continued to arbitrarily detain hundreds of protesters, dissidents, and human rights defenders, and sentenced many to imprisonment and flogging. Women, as well as ethnic and religious minorities, faced entrenched discrimination as well as violence. Enforced disappearances, torture, and other ill treatment were committed with impunity on a widespread and systematic basis. Judicial corporal punishments amounting to torture, including floggings and amputations, were imposed. Fair trial rights were systematically violated. The death penalty was used as a weapon of political repression. Executions were carried out, one in public and some others in secret. Those executed included people under the age of 18 at the time of the crime. The authorities continued to commit crimes against humanity by systematically concealing the fate and whereabouts of several thousand political dissidents, forcibly disappeared and extrajudicially executed in secret in 1988. Mass graves believed to contain their remains were subject to ongoing destruction. So this is a short summary, and there is so much more to be said, unfortunately. But like I said, it paints a very bleak picture of what's going on in Iran. And back to your question, Milad, Amnesty doesn't really rank countries in order of how bad they are when it comes to human rights. But I should mention that Iran is the second country in the world when it comes to carrying out executions after China. And that is also a sad ranking for Iran when it comes to executions.
True, but like in comparison to the a number of population, I mean, if you were compare it to the number of people living inside the country, I think Iran would be maybe the first one, because China has a big population basically. So in terms of numbers, you can just say Iran can be also, but the first. But thank you for the brief introduction and for the a very short answer you gave us. Thank you very much. I'm gonna come back to you for some more questions later on. The first speaker is gonna be Shiva Mahboubi. As I said, Shiva is the spokesperson for the campaign to free political prisoners in Iran. Shiva, you would have 5 minutes to actually to give you a speech. The same question goes to you. How bad actually you evaluate the human rights situation in Iran, specifically since you are focused and you work closely with the political prisoners in Iran? How bad or how good you evaluate the situation at the moment in Iran?
Thank you, Milad. And basically, I mean, Maya mentioned some of the views of human rights, and as you all know, and it has been 42 years of crime against humanity committed by the Islamic regime, and I'm sure everyone is aware of that nowadays. And Maya mentioned some of them, and also currently thousands of people are in prison, and they are from different parts of, almost all parts of the society: lawyers, artists, women's rights activists, children and labor rights activists, ethnic and religious minority, LGBTQ, and even families of political prisoners are now detained. So you can just, in a glance, you can see the extent of how horrible the situation is. But in these few minutes that I have, if you allow me, I try to focus on the issues that perhaps is more relevant to this conference. And you are all aware of the imprisoned dual citizens in Iran, and especially in Sweden. You are aware of it through the case of Ahmad Reza Jalali that we know, and who is now really in danger of being executed. And there are tens of dual citizens who are mainly from EU countries that have been tortured, being given lengthy, like a jail sentence and even execution. And I think now in 2021, to be honest, everyone around the world, they know that this is part of hostage-taking policy of Islamic regime, and using these dual citizens as basically bargaining chips in their negotiation with EU and the EU countries. But sadly, no effective action been taken by the EU governments, including Swedish government, to release these dual citizens. You know, we are often hear that the EU government saying that, well, we tried, but the Islamic regime, they do not recognize dual nationals, and that's why we can't do anything. But you know, the big question is that what happened to the duty of the EU governments, for example, Swedish government, to protect their own citizens? And shouldn't they put pressure on the EU, on the regime in Iran? Shouldn't the release of these dual nationals be the condition for continuing relationship with the government of Iran? And also, shouldn't they actually put pressure on the European Union and the European Parliament to have this agenda, have this part of their agenda in their negotiation with the regime? I mean, basically the jailed dual citizen being tortured, they're in prison, and the EU governments continue to meet the regime in Iran and continue to work on their economic relationships. You know, in my work with the dual citizen and their families, what I noticed, what I observed, that the dual citizen and their families actually feel lonely, feel powerless, because the government of their country, like Sweden, Germany, UK, they let them down. And I'm aware that, you know, some individual members of Swedish Parliament have spoken up actually in the European Parliament about human rights abuse. But however, when it comes to the cases like Ahmad Reza Jalali, I think by not taking active action, by not seeking active and immediate action to release him, in my view, and I think in their families' view, is the Swedish government basically is responsible for suffering of Ahmad Reza Jalali and his family, because they failed them. Simply, they failed them. And we can hear that from many dual citizens' family and them. You know, we recently had a recording from the prison from one of the British Iranian citizens. You see, inside Iran, people are protesting, going on strike every day, and they speak out even from prison. And I think, another thing, I believe, and I can see that the regime is petrified of the spirit of protest in Iran. But internationally, regime knows when it comes to the issue of human rights, despite imprisoning, torturing, executing dissidents in the last 42 years, despite imprisoning dual citizens, is despite imposing the most discriminatory law on women, despite massacres that have been committed by the Islamic regime, they know that the EU government are lenient toward the regime. And the regime diplomats are still welcomed.
Shiva, can you please summarize in 1 minute? There is only 1 minute. Thank you.
And they are still being there. I'm afraid it's more than 1 minute, but I'll continue after that. And I think, so therefore, when you look at that situation, they haven't been taking any serious action. It's not just that one, also the dual citizen are not the only one. One of the major major issues that EU has closed their eyes is the issue of women's rights abuse in Iran. And we see that, and I would like to also mention that millions of women, thousands of women who fought against hijab, and here you go, in 2017, we see that the team of so-called feminist diplomats of Swedish government going to Iran wearing hijab, and I think by that, what kind of message they send to millions of women. I think in that way, they tell the regime in Iran, go ahead, torture these women's rights activists who oppose hijab, because we still have our basically negotiation with you and we go ahead with you. There are a lot to talk about, and I'll continue in another section.
Thank you very much, Shiva. Yeah, I know it's like the first part is very short, so thank you for finishing on like a precise 5 minutes. We move on with Camila. There was like I remember Camila from a demonstration we had. It was a pleasure to run a demonstration on a street at the center of Stockholm, where Camila was one of the one of the people who attended that demonstration. Today, Camila is joining us through the seminar. Good to see you again, Camila. We're so pleased to have you here today. As I said, Camila is a member of the Swedish Parliament from the Green Party. Camila, how you see the situation of human rights in Iran, how you evaluate the situation of the people, and what's happening basically between the Swedish government and the Iranian regime. I mean, your question maybe have two parts, but just try to be more focused on the human rights situation, and then if there's extra time, you can explain the the relationship between the Swedish government and the Iranian, the Islamic Republic of the Iran. Camila, the floor is yours.
Thank you. That was quite a large question that you gave me, or even two. First, the situation for human rights in Iran is very serious and deeply worrying, and that is something that Sweden communicates to Iran. It regards not least the widespread use of the death penalty, which was what we were meeting about the last time we met, and discrimination and violence against women and girls, and the difficult situation of human rights defenders in the country. So it is important that Sweden and the EU keeps on to criticize Iran, and this is happening when Sweden meets Iran, and that we recognize, that we see that these violations are happening. And when it comes to what is happening in Iran, of course, I am not the right person to talk about that. There are much more knowledgeable people in this seminar that can do that because of experience and deeper knowledge than I have. But there must be a way that we can build a secure and stable and legally secure, predictable system all over the world, even in Iran and other countries that are not respecting human rights. That is what Sweden needs to keep on saying at all times. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a really short start, I guess. We move on. Actually, I'm going to have me personally have some question. I'm going to ask the question on the other parts. Pretty sure the audiences would have some more question from you. So hopefully I can ask the question on the other sections of the seminar. We move on. The next speaker would be Håkan. Håkan is from the left party of Sweden, Vänsterpartiet. Thank you, Håkan, for being here. The same question goes to you, how you see the human rights situation in Iran, how urgent basically it is in your point of view, and do you think it's necessary that the Swedish government do something regarding the human rights situation in a country like Iran? Hakan, the floor is yours. I'm not sure is Hakan inside the room. Hakan, if you can hear me, it's your turn to talk. Hakan is not here inside the room. I don't know what happened. He was inside the car, but he's not with us at the moment. All right, we move on with the last speakers. The last speaker would be Bahram Soroush. Bahram is the coordinator of the campaign to boycott the Islamic regime of Iran. Bahram, what's happening in Iran? Why you think the situation of human rights is catastrophic and is like urgent to do something to help the Iranian people overcome the bad human rights situation inside the country? Bahram, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Milad, and for inviting me. Yeah, I mean, this is a very important question that you're asking, and Maya and Shiva and Camilla have already pointed out some of the aspects of human rights abuse in Iran and what can be done. Just to start by saying, if the work that I am doing, or in a campaign, which you just mentioned, the campaign to boycott the Islamic regime of Iran, and why we started that campaign, because this is related to the question you're asking, because we issued in early March an important statement, and it's been signed by over 50 international and Iranian activists and figures internationally, which forms the basis of the campaign that we started. And part of that statement actually is, which forms the basis of the campaign and statement, is to outline the atrocities and the human rights abuse that has been going on in Iran for over 40 years. I mean, it is such a long list that it is difficult to bring everything together in one statement. In that statement, I don't know if you have seen it, I use this opportunity to invite everyone to visit the website of the boycott campaign that we have, and to sign that petition and join this campaign. And part of that statement outlines some of the most horrific atrocities that have been going on, not everything. And I'm just going to read out some of those here. Well, part of that statement says the criminal evidence for the boycott of the Islamic regime of Iran and its expulsion from the world community is horrific and overwhelming. This regime should be boycotted, among many other instances of crimes against humanity, for stoning women to death for sexual relations outside marriage, executing gay people, gouging the eyes and amputating the limbs of people for theft and other petty crimes, executing child so-called offenders, raping women political prisoners before their execution, so they are no longer virgins at the time of their execution, which is considered a sin in Islam, executing people for renouncing and leaving Islam, executing atheists and those without a religion, executing and persecuting members of the Baha'i faith and believers of other religions and beliefs, summarily and secretly, without the knowledge of even their families, executing in the summer of 1988, and this has been documented by Amnesty International as well, thousands of political prisoners, and there was a tribunal for that, Iran tribunal, thousands of political prisoners, many of whom had already served their sentences, and dumping their bodies in unmarked mass graves, assassinating dissident writers, poets, translators, and political critics in the late 1980s by stabbing, strangulation, and other brutal methods, and then dumping their bodies by roadsides and on the outskirts of the towns in what came to be known as the serial murders of dissident writers and political and cultural figures, practicing rape and pedophilia against children by legally allowing girls as young as 9 to be married off, throwing acid on women's faces for not fully observing the laws of compulsory hijab, assassinating exiled political dissidents abroad, abducting members of the political opposition, smuggling them into Iran, extracting forced televised confessions, and finally executing them, kidnapping foreign nationals or those with dual Iranian foreign nationality in order to blackmail those governments for money or for handover of its terrorist agents facing prosecution abroad. Under Islamic penal code and judicial system, flogging women's rights activists, trade unionists, and other so-called offenders. And I mean, the list is such a horrendous list, of what we call the gender apartheid.
Can you please summarize in 1 minute? The Iranian speakers are actually using their time in the proper way. Just 1 minute, Bahram, to summarize, please. Thank you.
I'll just sum up. I mean, as I said, the list is enormous, and I'll come back to that. But I just wanted to point out that every one of these crimes against humanity should constitute a basis for the boycott of this regime, for the political isolation of this regime internationally. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bahram. Thank you for your great speech. I think Hakan is back to the room. Hakan is with us right now. I'm hoping Hakan can hear me. Hakan, if you with us, welcome back to the seminar. The question for you would be how you evaluate the human rights situation in Iran, how urgent it is, and do you think it's necessary for the MPs, a Swedish government or Swedish parliament members, to do something regarding the human rights situation in Iran? Hakan, if you hear me, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope the sound from me is okay. I'm on a parking lot.
Sound is perfect, but I think your camera is shut. I mean, I cannot see you.
Oh, it's the sun, and I changed.
Okay, yeah, no problem. The sound is perfectly fine. Yeah, you can talk right now. Yeah, thank you.
Now I have the sun in my eyes instead. So thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar and discussion about Iran. As we just heard, the list of the crimes that the Iranian regime is doing is very long and very serious crime, especially targeting women, children, people of other sexuality like LGBT, LGBT people. So it's very serious crimes that the regime is doing, and it's very important that the international community condemns the crimes that the Iranian regime is doing. I think that the Swedish government hasn't been clear enough against the regime in the way that they want connection with the regime and the way that the crimes that the regime are doing. I think the trip that the Prime Minister Löfven did a couple of years ago to Tehran was a trip that the Swedish government shouldn't have done. It opens hopes and ways to getting closer to the regime, but just a couple of months, a year later, it was very clear for everyone that that was an impossible way to make the crimes less that they are doing every day. So it's very obvious that you need to have a tough rhetoric to the Iranian regime, but at the same time, you can't have sanctions that affect the people. The people are suffering from the regime's decision every day, and it's a small group of religious leaders that benefits from the regime politics and gets most of the money from both benefits from oil exports and things like that. And the people are suffering every day, and that's why people are trying to raise against the regime inside of Iran. The Left Party of Sweden has for a long time been a strong supporter of the Iranian people. We at the moment are looking to put in a motion this autumn into Parliament about Iran. And this time we are going to focus a little bit about not the connection that Iran has to the Middle East, rather the connection that Iran has to China and to Central Asia. So at the moment we are condemning search and reading up on issues where Iran and the Chinese regime are connecting each other, and as we know, the Belt and Road Initiative from the Chinese regime is one of the major factor in this region that's going to affect the region a lot for a long time. We are not sure what the impact it will do, but it's a lot of political effort that the Chinese government is putting in. So that's our main focus for the moment, to focus on the Iran-China cooperation and what that can mean for human rights violation and so on. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Hakan. Thank you for your speech. Hopefully you stay with us. On the second part, I have questions specifically since you mentioned the sanctions. I think that's a tricky part. Me personally have question, and I think some other speakers may have some questions. So hopefully we're gonna have a great discussion on the second part. All right, ladies and gents, we are at the end of the a first section. At this part, we're gonna have a short video that can be counted as a pause, and basically it just give more information to the speakers and also the people watching the program online, what's really happening inside Iran. Soon the video is over. I'm gonna open the second part. On the second part, the panelists, the speakers would have an open mic. You can talk to each other, you can challenge each other, and if there is anything missing on the first part, you can point it out. So feel free to talk in the way that you like. There is no specific order, so just open your mic and start talking. All right, let's watch the program. Let's watch the video. Before the video, I would like to point out again and remind all the people watching the seminar live, you can actually ask questions, you can put comment, express yourself. Soon the second part is over. On the third part, I'm gonna ask you a question and read your comments. And in case the panelists would like to answer, there would be a chance to answer your question. So please feel free to express yourself, put comment and ask questions. All right, let's watch the video and then open the second part. I'm gonna ask my colleagues please to show the video if it's possible. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. I can't remember a single moment in my life where Mansour, my dad, had any trace of negativity in his voice or actions. I mean, I did, obviously, but he'd always tell me to stay positive through the dark times and through the good, when we get stuck in traffic or when I couldn't get the coffee that I wanted. I don't want to, talk about the bad things, because I know that if my dad was alive and if somebody else died in the crash and that he was right here giving a speech, he wouldn't talk about the bad stuff. I won't. I look to the audience and I see his family, his friends, some relationships that he built over decades, and it comforts me because they're here to celebrate Mansour and Fareed's amazing lives. They've touched every single person in the audience. It's amazing, and I'm sure he feels the same way. Mansour, if I could describe him in one word, it would be strong. He's been through tragedy after tragedy, wall after wall, wrong turn after wrong turn, and he stood strong. He was amazing, and we loved each other. Thank you.
MashaAllah.
Thank you. would thank all of you guys for being here. Truly. Thank you. Thank you. He was amazing. I stand up here a week after this horrible tragedy and I still can't believe it. I feel like I'm dreaming. But I know that if I was dreaming, and that if he woke me up, he'd tell me that it's gonna be okay. And it will be. Thank you.
All right then, very sad and tragic speech by Ryan. For those of you, you may don't know what happened. Ryan has lost his father at the Ukrainian flight. The Iranian regime said the Iranian regime shot basically the airplane, the aircraft. They claimed that it was a mistake, but there are so many people don't believe, including me myself, don't believe it was a mistake. So Ryan was one of the people who lost his loved ones at the Ukrainian airplane. As you most probably know, Ahmad Reza Jalali's spouse, Vida Mehraniya, was supposed to send us a short video, but she was so sick. So she said, basically, she could not really send us a video. Instead, she sent us a message. So I'm just going to go very briefly through the message Vida has sent us. Vida has said, we ask the Swedish government to take all necessary action to ensure the freedom of Ahmad Reza, a Swedish citizen who is being kept hostage with continuously deteriorating health. We are grateful for all action by Sweden. However, the Swedish government should demand more than just canceling the death penalty. The demand should be for Ahmad Reza's immediate release. And that's a message by Vida, the Ahmad Reza Jalali, who is in jail right now in Iran's wife, to this seminar. If she's watching this seminar, I would like to say thank you for her message. All right, then we start the second part of the seminar. As I said, it's going to be an open mic. So basically, if you would like to say anything, challenge each other, it's about time. I'm going to start the second part with Håkan. I'm hoping that Håkan can hear me. You know, Håkan, you talk about sanctions that it's basically it's been done against the Iranian regime, mostly by the US governments. You mentioned, Håkan, that the people are suffering because of the sanctions. However, I was in a clubhouse in a group 2 days ago. It was like 8,000 people in there. Majority of the people were coming from inside the country. They were like, the sanction is really effective against the economic. The people are really poor, but there are like a big number of Iranian people still supporting the sanction because they think the sanction would help the people to downfall the Islamic regime. So basically, they see it as the opportunity. I'm talking about the sanctions. The sanction in the eye of the most of the Iranians is an opportunity, not necessarily a threat. So what do you think about that? Like, you know, do these sanctions really help the Iranian people to downfall the regime or not? Again, please open your mic in case you would like to say something. Just feel free to participate and say something. Håkan, if you hear me, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the question. I think it's important to say that the things that make people suffer most is the regime's policies and how the income to the country is distributed throughout the people, where a small elite is taking most of the money and therefore live better lives than the most Iranian people do. The middle class in Iran is nearly emptied, and most of the people are suffering very hard from the regime policies. So the thing that I think is sanctions could be one way to impose to the Iranian regime, but it's important that the sanctions are focused and direct on the regime and the people in charge of the regime, so that the people isn't suffering. And therefore, I'm thinking that sometimes when you talk about maximal pressure sanctions, it often means that a lot of people are suffering that isn't responsible for the policies. And it's important that the people who are in charge of the policies are the ones that are on pressure from the sanctions. So I'm positive to sanctioning against the regime, but I'm not positive if the people is going to suffering from the.
Let me ask you this, and I would like to ask the same question from Camilla too. Like, you know, the people of Iran, I mean, at least like some percentage of the Iranian people are supporting the sanction. It has a message to the Western politicians that they have to do something. They're supposed to stop cooperating with the Iranian regime. It's like known that like the left parties, mostly like the green parties in Europe and left parties, have the best economic and political relationships with the Islamic regime. I mean, don't you think like you as like a Swedish MPs should do something in the parliament to convince your colleagues, to convince the parliament, stop like cooperating with the Islamic regime and support the Iranian people?
That's the policy that I support. I criticize the Swedish government and the Prime Minister Stefan Löfven for traveling to Tehran in 2017. I think the Swedish government, the Social Democratic and Green Party government, has been to close the regime in Tehran. They hope that the trade will have benefits for the people, and that it will mean that the regime policy wouldn't be that harsh that they are. So I'm thinking that we have supported every sanction that the European Union has had on Iran, but I'm not sure that all the decision that Trump has made on sanctions, it's good for the Iranian people.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Camilla, same question for you. What do you think about the policy your party is following? Don't you think like the Green Party is in fact like working and cooperating with the Islamic regime while the people are suffering by the Islamic regime's policy inside the country? What do you think about that?
I think Håkan is problematizing the question about sanctions and in a good way when it comes to who is the target of sanctions, and that is something that I would like the other speakers to tell us about, what kind of things that would work and would aim at the right thing. Of course, well, if there was an easy way to change this would not be a problem anymore. But I think it is difficult, and it's difficult to balance, to have the possibility to make statements, and every time you meet with a country, state what our values are when it comes to human rights and democracy. And also, for example, when it comes to death penalty or prisoners or political prisoners, I guess there would be a risk that there would be no way of communicating this to the regime if there was a total boycott or sanctions. But that is something that I would like to hear the other speakers discuss, the pros and cons of different ways of acting.
Right, thank you. We move on to Bahram. Bahram, you are the coordinator of a campaign to boycott the Islamic regime of Iran. Why you think is necessary to boycott the regime? I've heard like from so many MPs here in Europe, specifically Sweden, if we would like to solve the problem, for example, imagine the case of Ahmad Reza Jalali. If we would like him to be back to Sweden, and if we would like to save him, it's important that we have a negotiation open policy with the regime in Iran. Boycotting is not solving anything, they say. And what do you think? Why you think it's important to boycott the Islamic regime?
I think the important thing to mention about the situation in Iran and the Iranian government is that we are not dealing with a normal, regular regime that one is used to. That usually the kind of regime that is part of the international community, you have diplomatic relations with, you exchange niceties, and from time to time you condemn, those sort of things. This is a killer regime. I mean, it is a kind of regime which is just hanging on to power by killing people. I mean, the kind of atrocities that we are dealing with here, they're not even comparable. They're just comparable to the historical cases of genocide. Whole-scale massacre of political prisoners, the kind of gender apartheid against half the population, against women. It is so horrific. I mean, would anyone tolerate, for example, marrying off 9-year-old girls or executing women?
Can I ask you something? Sorry for interrupt. We know countries that they do not have any embassies in Iran, and the Islamic regime does not have any embassy in that countries. Countries like Israel, US, Saudi Arabia, Canada has a very few like a diplomatic relationship with the Islamic regime. In practice, nothing has happened really. Like the Iranian regime are still doing the same thing against the people. Why you think boycotting can solve the problem regarding the human rights in Iran?
Well, because I think condemnation alone is not enough anymore. We can't just condemn, which is good. We should carry on to condemn. But that's what we've been doing for many years. But people of Iran are looking for practical action, for practical, meaningful measures. And I don't mean by that, I have a different perspective on, I'm not a supporter of economic sanctions, wholesale blanket economic sanctions, which can hurt the people. We have seen the situation in Iraq for years, what happened, crippling on the people. But I'm a supporter of sanctioning specific institutions of the government, which are political economic institutions like the Islamic Revolutionary Guards, for example, and against particular freezing the assets of the heads of the regime around the world. These are the kind of measures which have to be taken. But more importantly, I mean, we know the economic sanctions have been going on for a while, but the regime is still in power. Because I think more importantly, it is the political boycott of the regime. It's political isolation, cutting off diplomatic relations with it. I mean, this is the kind of regime, I know I have a different view to Camilla. I don't think we need to have diplomatic relations with the regime in Iran to talk to them, to bring about change. There comes a situation where a regime is such an outlier. It is so out of line with the sort of expected civilized norms of the international community. You can't talk with them anymore. I'll just finish in one sentence. And I think a political boycott of the regime, just as was done with that historical example we have with the racist regime in South Africa, the apartheid regime, that can be a very powerful tool. Isolate the regime in Iran and boycott it in terms of arms, sporting boycott, cultural boycott, and I think that is going to be very effective rather than just economic sanctions.
One more question. How practical you think it really is? Like, do you really think we can actually expect the international society to see the Iranian regime the same as the South Africa regime? So basically it's going to be like an international boycott against the Islamic regime, how practical it is. It can be really very like a short, in 1 minute, please.
Very briefly. I mean, that's a very good question, actually, because I get asked that as well. And and the other campaigners, because the answer is not black and white. We don't think the measure of success is either there is a complete boycott or we have lost it. To the degree we can force the international community to isolate the regime in Iran, and to that extent, to sort of strip it of diplomatic recognition, to that extent, we can help the people in Iran in their struggle to bring this regime down. See, the main struggle is going on in Iran. The people of Iran have resolved for many years to get rid of this regime. And what the international community can do for its part is not to lend legitimacy to this regime, diplomatic recognition to this regime. If that is cut off, that will be a tremendous support to the people in Iran.
Thank you very much, Baram. Thank you for your answer. Maya, my next question would be for you. I would like to remind again to all the panelists, your mic can be open. If you agree or disagree, you feel free to say something and put comments on each speaker's comments, basically. Maya, you from the Amnesty, I've been reading some brilliant records and reports from the human rights situation at the moment inside Iran. What can be the next step? Like, can Amnesty really communicate with the EU, or the a Western governments, try to ask them to put the human rights situation in the first priority? So basically, if there is any negotiation about anything, the human rights gonna be the first or second, or at least the third priority in that sort of negotiations. What the next step that Amnesty can do for the Iranian people? That would be my precise question for you.
Thank you, Milad. Yes, I think I'm going to combine answering your question to getting back to what Shiva said, because you said some of the things that I wanted to say in the beginning too, about Ahmad Reza Jalali and other dual nationals. And as you mentioned, it's becoming increasingly a problem that dual nationals are imprisoned in Iran. And this is something that other countries will have to continue dealing with, I think, and this will not go away for as long as as long as there is the current leadership in Iran. The Amnesty recommendation to Sweden has been all along during the time that we have worked specifically in the Swedish section of Amnesty. Obviously, we've worked a lot with Ahmad Reza's case, with him having the dual national citizenship here in Sweden too, is that Sweden needs to do more, and they need to work together with other countries. In Ahmad Reza's case, there are several other EU countries that have a kind of vested interest in his case, because he has ties to universities in their countries too, like Belgium and Italy. Austria has been also very active, and also the EU as a whole in different parts of the EU. And my feeling from an Amnesty standpoint here is that Sweden has not done enough when it comes to working together and using the full force of all of the EU member states. It seems to me that they have been trying to do this very much on their own, and very much using the so-called silent diplomacy, and that is not working. So I think the Amnesty suggestion and recommendation has been all along that Sweden needs to do more, and they need to join forces with other countries. And there are also other countries in the world with dual nationals like this, Canada, the United States, Australia. There are other cases too, and Sweden, I think, and other countries need to get together and discuss this problem and come up.
I have one more question. Actually, you see, at the moment that we're talking, there are a negotiation happening between the Iranian foreign minister Javad Zarif and the team around with the EU and most probably US. They're gonna talk about the nuclear deals, to try to save the deal they had before Trump became the president. What is missing inside these negotiations is the human rights. I mean, can Amnesty really condemn such ignorance, that they don't really talk about the human rights in their negotiation? Can Amnesty send the message to them and ask them to just talk about the human rights as well as they talk about the Iran's deal? But do you think Amnesty can do that?
Yes, our recommendation is always that human rights should be at the center of any dialogue and discussion with Iran, at any level and with all countries. It is, like you say, it should be at the center, because it's the most important thing that there is, and it can't be ignored. So that's definitely what we're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Maya. Shiva, you're the last speaker of this section. Why you think it's important that the EU, and to be more precise, Swedish government, have specific policy regarding the human rights in Iran, the political prisoners and other class of the Iranian people under pressure because of the Islamic regime? Why you think it's vital and important?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm not for economic sanction because it just hurts people. But let's call it political boycott. But I think, see, the quiet diplomacy doesn't work, never worked actually. You can't negotiate with a dictator. It doesn't work. Look at the history. So I think I hear what especially members of parliaments of Sweden is saying, but by all means, I'm asking, for example, Camilla, like you are from Green Party, we have jailed environmentalist activists who are tortured for the same cause actually you are fighting for. One of them died under torture. So I'm just asking, just imagine in Sweden, the Swedish government would torture and imprisoned environmental activists. What would you do? What if the negotiation doesn't work? So if we look at it in that way, that it makes more sense, because why should an environmentalist activist be tortured for the very thing we all talking about? And at the same time, I think the problem is we keep saying that we negotiate with them, we remind them, we told them. You know, after, I'm sure you know about the crackdown on the protests in November 2019, and Amnesty International produced a brilliant report on that. Let me read to you what your Foreign Minister Ann Linde says. Ann Linde tweeted after the report and mentioned the Amnesty's report, and then said that she supports the call for, I'm reading basically the tweet, she supports the call for a full investigation into the crackdown, which she called allegations. She supports the freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly, and it must be ensured. This is frankly not enough. A tweet, it's brilliant, it shows where you stand, but what is Ann Linde, for example, does to do that? Right now, Milad, you mentioned that there is a negotiation just these 2 weeks, and now with EU, with the Iran, they speaking about the basically nuclear. And it's very interesting just to mention that Germany is one of the governments who is in the team. Nahi Taghavi is a dual citizen, German and Iranian. Just to mention that as soon as the negotiations started in Vienna, they transferred Nahi Taghavi to solitary confinement. And we know why, just to use her as leverage and to put pressure on them. I don't think even actually a Swedish government can only speak for themselves, that they can actually impact the European Parliament, they can impact the European Union. So the question is, where do we stand with this? What do we do? If something doesn't work, what do we do with that? Like EU announced that, for example, they put sanction on, as you know, 8 security officials, including the chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. This is brilliant. And actually they did it in response to the crackdown on the protests of 2019. But what do we do with that? I think this is the responsibility. I believe this is the responsibility of you guys, the members of the
Shiva, let me just ask the question from Camilla. Camilla would like to add something. Camilla, Shiva is asking you, the response by the Swedish government is not enough. Your party is a part of the government at the moment. Don't you think the Swedish government, specifically the foreign minister, should do something, at least regarding the Ahmad Reza Jalali case and some other cases? Don't you think the government in Sweden are very passive regarding the human rights in Iran? Camilla, I'm asking you if you are in the room.
Oh, I need to unmute. Classic.
Yeah.
Of course, for me to know what is happening in meetings between Ann Linde and the Iranian government is it's impossible for me to know. But when she is getting questions about this, what she is saying is that she every time speaks about human rights, the death penalty, and the democratic values, and that they are working continuously with cases like Jalalian. And I have no reason not to believe that it is like that. But then, of course, when people are still in prison, and also Shiva, the way you describe it, like people that are fighting for the same thing that I am fighting for in the Swedish parliament, in a very safe environment for me as a person, in other parts of the world, the same political fight is it's a threat to your life to do the same things. And of course, that is why I want to listen to you, and that is why I'm attending today, to hear directly from you your views on what can be done, and what we could do more of or less of, or what is working or what is not working.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great honor to have you, Ram, but the point is, what the Swedish government has done so far is not good enough. Ahmad Reza is still in jail, and the human rights situation in Iran is catastrophic. On the other side, we see some cooperation between the both governments. Don't you think it's not good enough, and the Swedish government should be, I mean, they should feel more responsible about the things happening, and do some more intense policy regarding the situation of human rights in Iran?
I think human rights should always be on top of the discussions with Iran. And of course, you can say that if Swedish citizens are imprisoned and with the death penalty in other countries, that the Swedish government has not done enough. Of course, that's a reasonable thing to say. But I'm sure that the foreign ministry and the foreign minister is working as she describes to solve this and to
thank you.
Be that
Thank
voice.
you very much. Just to let you know, I would like to read this comment. And Disha is saying it's really time for the Swedish government to act against the murderous regime in Iran. Shiva, sorry for interrupting you. You have 1 minute to summarize.
Well, I'm just saying that when I say we, of course, this is relevant to the Swedish government. I think we need to ask ourselves, what we're going to answer to the next generation. We're going to say that a murderous regime was under power, killing all these people, and we just sent letter. I mean, don't take me wrong. I appreciate your efforts. And I know actually the fact that you guys are being in this conference, that's really, really important. And I appreciate it. But I have to say that I think the problem is, for example, you say, what can we be done? What happened if the Swedish government tell to the regime in Iran, saying to the regime in Iran that actually the condition for me to have a meeting with you, to the trade, basically meeting with you, is that you need to release Ahmad Reza Jalali. What would happen? I think that's a question.
Thank you.
I think the problem is the Swedish government is more thinking about the economic interest of itself than the Ahmad Reza Jalali.
Thank you, Shiva.
That's the problem.
Thank you very much. Sohela says, Sohela is one of our audiences, also said we need action. All right. I think we are at the end of the second part of the seminar. If any of the panelists would like to add something, please do. Otherwise, my colleague has prepared a video as a pause and as a the video that to end the second part, and then we move on. We have very short time to end the seminar. If you would like to add something, please do. Otherwise, we move on to the third part. I think.
Can I just add something, Milad? Sorry.
Sure.
Because
sure. Very shortly, please.
We're going toward the International Workers' Day. And the other question I have, maybe after the break, they can answer. I know that we're in touch, many labor rights activists being harassed and actually being taken to prison because they want to prevent them from having International May Day. I mean, International Workers' Day is a national day in Sweden, as far as I know, and everything is closed. But in Iran, is illegal, and you can be executed and tortured for that. So my question is, what do we do about it? What the members of parliament who are here can do, can force the government Sweden to do something about it, because they are now being arrested to prevent them from having gathering on the International Workers' Day. Thank you.
Yeah, true. I think the left party, like, you know, mostly like run the demonstration for the May Day. So Håkan maybe can answer this question. Håkan, if you like to talk and answer Shiva's question very briefly, the floor is yours. Otherwise, we can move on to the other sections.
Thank you very much for the question. It's interesting, and it's, of course, we see a lot of union activists being targeted in Iran, and it's very hard to be a union activist and to stand up for your rights as a unionist. I think the hard question here is what can you do? I mean, we often raise this question in the parliament with the foreign minister. We condemn what's happening. We're focusing. We doesn't look away. We're focusing on what's happening inside of Iran, and that's something we need to do, because the regime needs to know that we have the eyes on them. But at the same time, they have the possibility to do that, because they are a regime, a dictatorship that are punishing their own people and they doesn't want people to organize even as in a union, and therefore they want to crack down on everyone that's organizing themselves. So I think it's a way for the elite in Iran to punish the people.
Thank you very much. I like your background, by the way, Håkan. I can see the V of the Vänsterpartiet. It's so cool to have it. Yeah.
It's good to be seated in a seat and not in the street and running around.
Everyone would understand you're from the a Vänsterpartiet or from the left party. That's so cool to see that.
Milad, can I just add something, or shall I leave it to the next part? I don't know if we'll have the opportunity to add something.
Very quickly, please, because we are at the end of this section. Please, Baram.
Sure. Very quickly. Now, I just wanted to say that, you know, my take is that it's not. I mean, my take is quite positive, actually, about the international environment, and I think people are moving towards more action against the regime in Iran. And I think the situation, the goal we are striving towards is the example of South Africa, you know, the apartheid regime. And I think that should be the goal. Whether we achieve it, that's another matter. But that should be what should be guiding us. And the question, I think, to all of us now is what is stopping us from treating the regime in Iran just like the regime of gender apartheid and, you know, mass executions, just like the racist South African regime, you know, the apartheid regime? What is stopping us? I mean, are we waiting for more atrocities? And I think that is why the basis, our sort of evidence and the criminal case for that is quite strong. And I think the United Nations special rapporteurs, you know, the work of the Amnesty, and there are so many organizations are moving in that direction, and I'm quite hopeful, actually.
Thank you very much, Baram. Thank you very much for your comment. All right, let's just watch a short video. We move on. I have 2 questions for the next part, and hopefully after those questions we can end the seminar. If Hossein, if you play the video, I would be very grateful. I think the video should be ready and should be somewhere. If you can play the video, and then we move on to the third one. Thank you.
این خیابون تو رو از من گرفتن. کفشم پاره شد در راه انقلاب. بعد از مدتی سکوت امروز تصمیم گرفتم سکوتم رو بشکنم.
آخرین محل ارتباط حیاتی دنیای بچه‌های ما با حیات فعلی. آخرین جایی که از اینجا پر کشیدن و شکسته بار رفتم.
من زیر تابوت مصطفی رفتم و به مصطفی قول دادم که مصطفی از امروز صدای تو هستم و خاموش نمیشینم تا روزی که بمیرم.
قاتل بچه من رهبره. من هیچ وقت ازش نمیگذرم. تا قیام و قیامت نمیگذرم. یک مادری 7 سال مشکی تنشه.
خطاب همه مردم جهان و فعالان عرصه حقوق بشر نهادهای بین المللی. من نادرا 10 سال تمام لحظات زندگیمون مالامال از ترس و وحشت از حکم اعدام زانیار و لقمان بود. ددهایی که همراه اقبال چه شبهایی را با ترس از اجرای حکم اعدام تا صبح بیدار بودیم.
ما از جمهوری اسلامی بیزاریم. من به شخص از جمهوری اسلامی بیزار شدم. از جنگ تحمیلی که تحمیل کردن به ما. من بازمانده جنگم. با خانواده های ما بسیار بسیار بد برخورد کرده جمهوری اسلامی و خود بنده.
خطابم به رهبران دنیاست. جمهوری اسلامی بچه های ما رو کشته، بچه های مردم رو کشته. آیا در مقابل این همه فساد، جنایت و ناکارآمدی وقتش نشده که جمهوری اسلامی رو بایکوت کنید؟ شما باید در کنار مردم ایران قرار بگیرید و جمهوری اسلامی رو بایکوت کنید.
All right, then. That was like a short clips from the people of Iran, well-known faces, Shola Pakravan, and some other people talking about the situation in Iran. I have two questions. The audiences has not mentioned which specific panelists they would like to answer, so I'm just asking the question. If anyone would like to answer it, please do. Otherwise, I'm just gonna go and pick up a specific panelist to answer the question. Said Parto said, the Islamic regime has proven a record of crime against humanity, and everyone knows that. The negotiations with the regime have been futile and ineffective. Why EU countries like Sweden do not take a decisive and effective actions, such as politically boycotting the regime's heads of state and sanction the heads of state from traveling to Sweden and EU. Does Swedish and other EU government prioritize trade over human rights, profits before people and human rights? Why such a policy in EU is followed by the government? Anyone over here would like to answer this question? Otherwise, I would like Shiva to answer this question. Why you think the EU governments and Swedish government, to be more precise, following such a policy?
I'd be happy to answer, Milad, but I think that's more relevant to the members of parliament because I'm not representing, obviously, the Swedish government, but just to say that I think the question answers itself. It's the economic relationship, and we know that especially after the negotiation on nuclear program in 2016, all these European government poured into Iran to invest money and to kind of have trade, negotiation and all that. So I think the main thing is that nothing else, to be honest. Otherwise, why would stop them? Bahram mentioned something about gender apartheid. So, if you look at, me as a woman, I'm not even a second-class citizen because there is no any rights for citizens in Iran. So if me as a young kid have to wear hijab, have to be punished, I was kicked out of school at the age of 12 for not wearing hijab. I was arrested for 3.5 years in the best year of my life. So what is this double standard that we talk about South Africa and the apartheid, and we talk about Myanmar right now, rightly, it's always on the TV and they're talking about the sanction and all this stuff. So why is it different for Iran? And the only thing makes a difference to me, Iran has a very kind of, the economy in Iran, the location in the area in the Middle East, it's quite beneficial. That's all I know.
Thank you.
And I think that's why, but I think that would be more relevant to the members of parliament.
Yeah, sure. I would like to ask Camilla and Håkan the same question, but before that, please let me read Göran Gustafsson's comment. It's like a cool comment. I think I would like to read it. Göran saying, as a long-time trade unionist, I propose ultimate demands to Islamic Republic. For instance, Of course, we can have commercial relations with you and other relations, but first release Ahmad Reza Jalali, release all jailed worker activists and political prisoners. Then we can talk what shall happen if Ahmad Reza dies in prison. Business as usual. I have connections with bus drivers in Iran. Sorry, it's like, it's really tough to read the comments on the Zoom application. Several of them are in prison. Hassan Salehi is condemned to 5 years in jails and flogging 74 times for organizing a 1st of May meeting. How can Swedish Social Democrats continue cooperate with them? Release Ahmad Reza immediately, or there will be not trade and other relation. It is that easy. Thank you, Yoran, and sorry for me to reading that bad. As I say, it's very small over there and it's really tough to read it. Camila or Hakan, would you like to answer this question? Camila, would you like to say something?
Well, thank you. Of course, it's hard to know what should best be done, but what we need to do is keep working with that human rights and should be in focus. When it comes to, I'm thinking about the question about how the apartheid regime was treated by the world. I don't know how that would work, but then it was a lot of countries doing the same thing, and Sweden is working within the EU and within the UN. But I think that we will have to see if that is something that could happen even with this situation.
Yeah, sorry about that. I have to unmute my microphone. Thank you, Camila. Hakan, if before you actually participate and say something and put any comments about the things for the seminar, I would like to read this comment also. I think it's a really important comment by Pishko Khosrow, if I'm not mistaken by the name. Khosrow said, I'm interested to know how the participant in the seminar works with the ethnic minorities in Iran, who constitutes approximately 1/3 of Iran's population, but due to their activism for democracy and self-determination are targeted more harshly by the state than the ethnic majority. Would you like to talk about like a minority ethnics, Hakan, in Iran, and what's the policy by the Swedish government? I know in the Venstre Party there are some Kurdish Iranian parliament MPs, and like I know there are some, like as I said, like Kurdish Iranian MPs in the parliament of Sweden. I mean, do you think the Swedish government can do anything regarding the ethnics in Iran?
So we have 3 persons that are in parliament that has their roots in Iran, and I think none of them have Kurdish roots. We have a former MP that has Kurdish Iranian roots. The other ones are from other groups in the Iran society. I think it's important, as the question says, to see that the minority is nearly more of a majority, and because the elite is coming from a small ethnic group, dominates for historical reasons other groups. It's part of the regime tactics to put ethnic groups against each other, to make ethnic groups fight over lack of resources, and therefore make tension between groups instead of focusing on the regime. So it's a common way for dictatorships and regimes to move the focus away from them. I also think the question about profits before human rights is very interesting. It's one of the key questions for politicians to think about in the time that we're living in the society, in global politics at all at the moment. For instance, we have the discussion about China and which way that the Western countries should engage with China, and at the moment the tension is rising because of the human rights violation from China, and I think it's very good that it is rising, and that the Western countries are saying that human rights is more important for us than economic profits. And it's important to stay that way and have that focus in many countries. I'm not sure in a way, and this is why we have this sort of seminar to discuss and think about it. If we have a regime, a dictatorship that we click all connection with and try to isolate from the world. We have one regime that we have done that with, and it's the North Korean regime. And the people in Northern Korea is still suffering a lot from hunger, from COVID, from every sort of problem. And the country is very close as a result of that. So I'm not sure that just not having diplomatic relations is the only way to have. I think it's important to find a way where you criticize, but you still have information, knowledge, connections with minorities, with opposition, with groups that are trying to have a different society. And therefore, it's important that Sweden has staff on the ground in Tehran, for example. Yeah. But we have it in North Korea, and therefore with one of the most informed countries about the situation in Northern Korea as well. So it's difficult in politics, but I think the most important thing is that we are focusing on human rights before profits. And in a world where we see an increase in dictatorships, less democracy in the world, it's important to stand up for human rights like Amnesty do every day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Håkan. I think Bahram
Can I
and Shiva
comment?
disagree with you. Shiva, before you say, before I know you disagree with Håkan, obviously, but like let me just like clarify this. let me. I mean, on the when I read actually Göran Gustafsson's comment, Göran has said Hassan Salehi, but I think he was referring to Mahmoud Salehi instead. Göran, if I'm mistaken, please feel free to put comments, but I think you were talking about Mahmoud Salehi, not Hassan Salehi. Shiva, please, the floor is yours.
I wanted to comment on what Hakan said. I think you're right. These kind of conferences is for all of us. Surely we care about human rights. That's why we're here. And therefore, we try to think together to see what are the practical way of putting pressure on the regime. So, see, the thing is, as soon as we say sanction, we don't mean economic sanction. The point is, some of the suggestion, for example, the members of parliament can put pressure to basically expel the representative of the Islamic regime from ILO, International Labour Organization, because they're not obviously representative of the regime. I know that you might say, well, this is the place for representative of the government. But see what happened in Myanmar, the coup happened in Myanmar, all the governments said that we don't recognize them, we do this and this and that, we do this sanction. Or for example, when it comes to women, actually it is possible to demand something. As you know, women are not allowed to participate in specific sports. They have to have headscarf. And just recently, one of the coach for ski was a female, was supposed to go for competition in Italy. She was not allowed to, because according to Islamic laws, you have to have the permission from your husband to travel. So this to me is when we talk about it, can we put pressure on the sport agencies? That's part of the boycott we're talking about. Can we put pressure on them to actually not allow the teams from Islamic regime come there with the condition saying that women needs to be there, freely with whatever? Or for example, when they executed, you might know about it, the wrestling champion, the Iranian wrestling champion Navid Afkari, when they executed him, there was a talk about asking the International Sport Agency to boycott the Islamic regime. So when we're talking about the boycott, we can just kind of put it down as 1, 2, 3. These are the things that is possible to do. So there are lots of ways. Actually, it's possible to boycott the Islamic regime, not the people. That's the difference.
Oh, I agree with you on this, Shiva. I think you're responding very well and arguing very well for that sport and politics is connected to each other, and you need to put pressure on Iran in international organization in multilateral system. If you doesn't put that pressure on the regime, you are making that political impact. So I agree on you on what you're saying.
So what I mean, Jessica, just one sentence. It's not about isolation. It's about putting condition. This is a condition we're going to negotiate with you. This is a condition we're going to have trade negotiation. This is a condition we're going to meet you. It's about that. If we go from human rights before profit, then this is how we're supposed to go, which is, I think, it's a principle for many of your parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yuran said he was referring to Hassan Saidi. So let me just read that specific paragraph again. Hassan Saidi is condemned to 5 years in jail and flogging 74 times for organizing a 1st of May meeting. Thank you, Yuran, for the corrections. There are more comments. Yeah, just gonna be less than 2 minutes. Let me just read this comment, and then I'm gonna ask the last questions very quickly.
Mira, could I just come in on the last point?
Camila says she would like to leave very quickly. So yes, if you can make it very short, please do, Bahram.
Yeah, I mean, because this is a very important point that was raised, and I'm glad that Håkan agrees that certain things can be done. Because, I mean, if you look at the historical precedents with, the apartheid regime in South Africa, sporting boycott was an important element, a cultural boycott even. I mean, at that time, a lot of people felt ashamed if their names was associated with the regime in South Africa. And I think we have to push the world towards that, and it is possible. And I should, Håkan mentioned the issue in North Korea, for example. I mean, I have some good news about the case of Iran, which is different. In Iran, there's a struggle going on. See, the people of Iran, and that was the case in South Africa as well. When you have a struggle going on, when people don't want that regime, it's very easy to offer international solidarity. People will readily accept it. And for that reason, sporting boycott is supported in Iran. Arms embargo is supported in Iran. Political isolation, as we saw in that clip, for example, of bereaved mothers who have lost their children. They are asking the world, they are telling that this regime is not their representative. Please isolate, don't treat it as don't give it diplomatic legitimacy. And this is the kind of goal we should strive towards. And I think it is possible. And it doesn't require negotiation with them, but putting pressure on them, not giving them legitimacy. I think that is an important, crucial point to mention.
Thank you very much, Bahram. Thank you. Camila, I know you're about to leave quite soon. One last question, and then you have to go. What do you think it can be done in future? I mean, do you have something in mind that you would do after this seminar to solve the problem somehow, the situation of human rights in Iran?
Thank you. I think what we need to do in every aspect, and every time, in every country where these violations of human rights are occurring, Sweden and EU and the UN, and in all associations we are in, we need to react. We have been talking about types of reactions from the society, for example, when it comes to sports. And I think that is something in free and democratic countries, that every citizen has a responsibility everywhere where you are engaged in something to stand up for human rights. And for me, what I will have to do is to keep following your work and following the situation in Iran, and discuss this with the Greens in Sweden and in Europe. Thank you very much for everything that you have shared today.
Thank you, Camila. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being patient, and thank you for answering all the questions. I wish you a great time and have a nice evening. Hopefully we're gonna have you in some other demonstrations or like seminars, and I'm gonna see you around somehow in Stockholm. Thank you very much for being here today. Thank you. I'm just gonna read this last comment, and then I'm just gonna go to the a final part. I think it's related to the things that Maya is doing. So I would like Maya to answer this comment or questions. Nushi Nazemi saying, apart from those political activists and union members who are in prison and under pressure, there are political and human rights activists who fled Iran to Turkey, and the asylum application have been proven by the UNHCR, but they have not been transferred to any safe countries. They have been stayed in Turkey more than 7 years waiting to be sent to any safe country. The UNHCR has passed its duty to the Turkish Immigration Office. Unfortunately, since then, the life condition of the Iranian asylum seekers has deteriorated. Is there any solution for this problem? Maya, can you please answer this question?
Yes, there should be a solution to that problem. I think it's a question of political will from, for example, the EU countries, including Sweden. I don't work specifically with issues of asylum seekers. I have colleagues who do, and I will look into this situation. I should say, in general, though, that we are aware of the very difficult situation for many asylum seekers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I don't see any more comments. Suleiman Sigart, she's saying support families of the PS-752 Ukrainian passengers aircraft that killed 176 people, including 23 kids. Thank you, Suleiman, for your comments. This is the last and the final part of the seminar. I would like to ask each panelist what can be and what should be done in future. Håkan, I would like to ask you to first of all answer my question, what should be done in future? And then if there is any missing part for your speech, it's about time to summarize and give us the final conclusion of the seminar. Håkan, the floor is yours.
So the first things that's going to happen is that the Parliament in Sweden will have a debate on the Middle East and on Wednesday evening. And I think that Iran and Iran's impact in the region will be highly discussed. We see that Iran's regime is putting a lot of money into the military forces and focusing on that instead of welfare for the people in Iran, and that they are trying to get leverage in the region and trying to have militias in other countries that support the regime, and they are very focusing on the regional dynamic with Saudi Arabia and Turkey, both in if you can say cooperation, but mostly in competing with each other of regional dominance. And I think it's important to see the regime's role in a bigger picture, just even outside of Iran. We haven't spoke so much of that tonight. What can I say more?
I lost Håkan. I think something happened to his video. Håkan is not here. All right. I would give Håkan a couple of more minutes to finish his statement. If he come back to the seminar, I would like to move on with Baram. Baram, what can be done in future? And if you want to summarize your speech, it's about time. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much. And thanks very much to everyone, who's been at this important conference, and to you, Milad, and the other organizers. And I think the fact that we have gathered here shows that there's a strong sentiment internationally against the regime in Iran. And that's why I said I'm hopeful, because I can sense that. And I can see, for example, even the UN, which is very cautious, sometimes recently has started publishing reports through its special rapporteurs condemning the atrocities in Iran. For example, the 1988 genocide in Iran. And also there was a very well-documented work, Trampling Humanity, by Maya's organization Amnesty, which gave a very detailed account of the atrocious and horrific atrocities that have been going on in Iran following the November 2019 mass demonstrations. The demonstrations in Iran can be interpreted as the voice of the people in Iran. People of Iran have very clearly, I don't think there's anything else they can do to say that they don't want the regime in Iran. And there's a struggle going on by women, by workers, by the youth. There's no section of the society in Iran which doesn't have a grievance against this regime. So the resistance, protest against the regime in Iran is overwhelming. It's it's huge. And that is why we need to make that connection with that movement. And internationally, I think condemnation is good. That should be done. Exposure of its crimes, the regime's crimes, is fine. But we should go beyond that now, take practical measures. I don't think this regime has committed less atrocities than the apartheid regime in South Africa. Anything, it has committed even more horrendous atrocities. So there is a very strong case to move in that direction in terms of a political isolation of the regime, the arrest of its officials who come to abroad, for example, as was done with Hamid Nouri, for example, in Sweden, or Asadullahi in Belgium, and also referring the Iranian regime for its crimes against humanity, because even the UN rapporteur said, now we are very close to calling Iranian regime's atrocities as the offense of crimes against humanity. And that is an important step. And we would like that to be followed up by referral of the Iranian regime. But some of the governments, Sweden could do that very easily, refer it to the ICC, for example. And I think these are the practical actions we need to do. And other speakers have talked about the sporting boycott of the regime, the cultural boycott of the regime, and most importantly, finally, not lending legitimacy to this regime. This is not a normal regime. It's not a regular regime where you have diplomatic exchange, diplomatic niceties with them. It's just you have to help the people in Iran, join with them to put pressure on it. And I just want to make a promise. The Iranian people are very close to getting rid of this regime. And it is high time that everybody internationally joins the struggle of the people in Iran to put in an end to this blight on the conscience of humanity in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bahram. Thank you. Håkan is back. Welcome back, Håkan. I think you couldn't finish your final statement. If you would like to add something, the floor is yours. I have a great comment by Andisha for you too. So please, the floor is yours.
No, I think I'm quite fine. I heard what you're saying in this seminar and what your position is, and it's interesting for me as a politician to hear it. And I think we will continue the dialogue about the Iranian regime and what to do about it. And we in the left party will focus in Iran and that in the motion that we will put into the parliament in this autumn. So thank you very much for a good seminar, and sorry for all the technical problem that I
No problems, Håkan. Just before you go, Håkan, Andisha is saying, Håkan, if you agree with Shiva, then you really have to bring it up with your party and as a parliamentarian about the inhuman that is happening in Iran. That was a comment for you, so I had to read it for you before you go. But thank you, Håkan, for being here. I'm gonna move on to you, Maya. The same question: what can be done in future? The Amnesty International has done so far. The report that you've done, the action against the inhuman situation in Iran so far was brilliant. There are so many people inside and outside the country appreciate what you're doing. What do you think can be done in future? Maya, the floor is yours.
Thank you. While I have the floor, I just also wanted to chip in on the minorities and the situation of minorities, because one of the things we actually saw last year is that the death penalty, a disproportionate number of people who were executed in Iran were actually members of the Kurdish and Baluchi minority groups. But we also see that there are several other minorities that get treated proportionately worse, actually. Second, to answer your question, I would say that obviously the human rights violations in Iran is ultimately the responsibility of the leadership of Iran. But having said that, there are a lot of things that other countries can do. And I think Sweden, together with the EU, need to think long and hard of how they can creatively use all of the diplomatic roads and tools that they have. And I'm sorry to use a cliche, but think outside of the box when it comes to both dealing with individual cases, such as Ahmadreza Jalali that we've been talking about tonight, but also when it comes to pushing for human rights in Iran in general. I'll stop there. Thank you. And thanks for a very interesting discussion and seminar.
Thank you very much, Maya. Thank you. Appreciate it. The last speaker for the final statement, Shiva, the floor is yours. What can be done in the future? And if you'd like to summarize the whole thing happening in the seminar, it's about time. The floor is yours.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate having the speakers here. I think it's really important. And I hope other parliaments in other countries take this as an opportunity and have more conversations with organizations like us to talk about what can be done. I'm representing political prisoners and their families, and I'm sure that I'm echoing their demands and voice here. I think if we think outside of the box, as Maya said, and kind of going and thinking about something else, what comes to my mind is basically what needs to be done by Swedish government and the EU and other government is that the release of political prisoners, the end to execution, the investigation into the crime against humanity committed by the Islamic regime in the last 42 years, they have to be conditions before they have any negotiation with them. Other than that, I don't think none of these letters and stuff will work. And having said that, I think I agree that there is a strong will to stand up for humanity in Iran, to stand up against the regime. And I think this conference also represents the strong will around the world in every country. So therefore, I think we need to talk about it, how we can translate this into practical actions by all the members of parliaments, in different countries, and specifically in Sweden. And I'm hoping that this is just not one-off conference, and we continue working together and thinking together to actually boycott the Islamic regime in Iran. And I think this is the only way we can stand up for humanity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shiva. Thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, all the panelists for attending the seminar, Maya, Baram, Shiva, Håkan, Camilla, and also the people attending and being with us during the seminar, putting comments, Göran Gustafsson, Suleiman Sigarche, I Cancel, Karim Shah Mohammadi, Salar, Saeed, Andishe, Parisa, and the other people. Sorry, I'm not mentioning all the names, Siam, Mike, Sarah, and everyone's. Thank you for being here. And I'm very sorry, Yoran, you put a brilliant comment over here, but it's a bit long and we're running out of time. I think we can like put it somehow in the comments later on, or like at the end of the seminar when it's recorded, we can add your comment also over there. But thank you, Yoran, and thank you everyone for the comments and your participant during the seminar. Keep your eyes open. Hopefully we're gonna have more seminars, more online seminars like this. By this seminar, hopefully we can help and like improve the situation of human rights in Iran, and beside that, the whole region in Middle East. Thank you, and a special thanks to Hossein Khodaifer for being in charge of the technical issues, kicking out the randomers at the beginning and controlling and being in charge of the whole program. Thank you very much. And hopefully we catch up sometime soon. Thank you.
چهار تا کارگر رفتن خودشون رو آتیش زدن برای 1 و 200. لعنت به این زندگی.
ببینید در مملکتی که روی کوهی از ثروت نشسته، ایران دومین دارنده ذخایر نفت غازی دنیاست، 4مین دارنده ذخایر نفتی دنیاست. تو چنین مملکتی فقر و بدبختی و فلاکت از سر روی این جامعه داره میره بالا. مگه میشه این وضعیت دوام پیدا کنه؟ توی مملکتی که کارگر حقوقش 5 برابر زیر خط فقره و اون وقت این حقوق به مدت 5 ماه پرداخت نمیشه، کارگر میره اعتراض میکنه، به شلاقش محکوم میکنن. تو ملعام به کارگر شلاق میزنن، کارگر رو 70 نفر رو تو 7 تپه به احضار کردن به دادگاه، گروه کارگر رو احضار میکنن به دادگاه. اخیراً 20 نفر از کارگر هکو رو احضار کردن به دادگاه. معلومه که در چنین مملکتی این وضعیت به همین شکل دوام نمیاره.
من داشتم زندگیمو میکردم، کارگری میکردم و کشتیم ادامه میدادم و الان تیغ اعدام کاملا روی گردنم شد. پس ممکن بود هر کدوم از جوانای دیگه این مملکت به حکم قرعه دستگاه قضایی جای من بیاد. تو این 2 سال هیچ عدالتی ندیدیم و حالا من از شما میخوام که قضاوت کنید و انتخاب کنید که من و خانوادم لیاقت کمک و نفس گرم شما رو داریم یا نه.
انتخاب من جمهوری اسلامی نبوده، نیست، نخواهد بودم.
2 تا از برادرای من که بهترین دوست و همبازی کودکی هم بودیم رو اعدام کردن. برادرای من کارگر بودن، دست خسته رو روی شکم سیر میذاشتن که به دست این رژیم اعدام شدن. بهرام هنوز 21 سالش نشده بود و شهرام هنوز نوداماد بود که اعدامشان کردن. اگر میخواهید این همه ظلم و ستم و اعدام تمام بشه، باید جمهوری اسلامی ایران را بایکوت کنید.